Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. With everything that's happened in this sport over the last couple of weeks, you'd be forgiven for forgetting that it's actually meant to be about the racing, but the on-track action has been highly underwhelming so far this year. And why is that the case? James Allison at Mercedes says, yes, Red Bull have dominated this cycle of regulations and absolutely nailed it, but the way the rules have been designed by the governing body is conducive, he believes, to the poor quality racing that we are currently experiencing. He wants big changes and fast. Do you agree with him? Very much interested in your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, again, some big updates in the media today. Just the other day, we saw big rumours that there were big names being targeted by Ferrari to try and get these guys from Red Bull. Now, at the same time, would they not be interested in these guys if they were willing to go? Just because we believe Red Bull are going to go through some degree of a restructuring in the near future. There's all the Horner, Marco, Verstappen chaos still brewing, I'm sure, behind the scenes. And it's quite plausible that other big names will be on their way out of the team at some point, especially with rumours around the budget cap, the changes they're making to that, the whole percentage allocation thing getting scrapped. So Red Bull will probably have to let some people go. Enrico Balbo, David Morgan, Ben Ward, all were linked to Ferrari the other day. Now reports are saying actually that's not the case. Ferrari isn't in talks with the big names. They're interested in other parties. This actually, as Kamal initially says, that Fred Vasseur has basically looked at what positions could be replaced by new names. Goes on to say that the first name was Loic Serra of Mercedes. They've got that guy. He's leaving soon. But the other names they're going to try and mainly fill in by no interest in the big names in the press that are circulating. Many young names from other teams, especially Red Bull, are interested in. So they will hire some people. Potentially, I think 15, he says at the end here, says that, yeah, basically 15 new names will transfer from other teams. So Ferrari are making moves. They just might not be making moves for the big names, as we have mentioned. But look, if they can convince Newey to join, then obviously they're not going to say no, are they? This is what the other teams feel as well. There are certain individuals that they would like the opportunity to get a hold of. And Toto Wolff says if Horner stays at Red Bull, interesting scenarios open up, i.e. Verstappen, Newey, potentially others. I only read what happens in the media, and every team would like Max. He is the strongest driver. That, of course, has been the talking point. Of course, if they don't get Max, Gunther Steiner has kind of given his ideas on what they should do. He actually thinks Nico Hülkenberg could be a good idea for them to sign, but certainly Toto Wolff won't be hiring himself in that role because there's rumours circulating today, well, actually Toto saying himself that he managed to crash a Mercedes GT3 around Imola recently. My driving skills are not ideal at the moment, he says. During our test in Imola, I had a problem with the traction control and pecked the wall after 2 laps. So they will need some alternatives there, and of course Max would be the ideal alternative to Lewis Hamilton next season, but they will need to prove to Max they can still build a competitive car, and that is the primary focus right now of Mercedes. They have lots of issues to solve. Again, they were very confident in their car in Bahrain. They've turned up to Jeddah, and the data paints a rather different picture indeed. This is the most damning data that I've really seen so far this season on any car that isn't the Alpine, and even Alpine is mentioned here, on the high-speed performance of the Mercedes. If you guys didn't see this the other day, if you watched any of the Hamilton onboards trying to follow Norris through that section, dirt air is a factor. Dirt air will cost you 3 to 4 tenths of a second through that sector. That's what Andrew Chauvelin, I think, said yesterday on the Mercedes kind of post-weekends analysis video that they did. But Hamilton was losing a second in that sector. So the car was bad, and this is even pretty damning that they were slower than the Alpine, they were slower than the Williams. The only car they were faster than in Sector 1 was the Haas, and the Haas had like the lowest wing level of anybody. So that was not impressive, and there were certain corners where Max was full throttle, and Hamilton and Russell were like 60% throttle. Such is the difference in the performance of that car in the higher speed corners. There is something wrong. And so basically, just to clarify this, where Max was standing at the bottom, people were like mistranslating this, but basically I think the translation is flat out, or effectively going full throttle, and they were only using 60% of the accelerator. So lots of things for Mercedes to figure out going forwards, and they still clearly haven't got a full grasp of these set of regulations as they would have liked to at this point, and they believe that there is to some degree a fundamental issue with their new car. They're running experiments to try and figure out what the problem was, and if they can't figure it out by Melbourne, they're going to be in for a hard time, because there are certain sections of that track that are rather similar in many ways to that that Sector 1 in Jeddah that was causing them just so many problems. But the big talking point really on the track this season has been just the lack of interesting racing. Both races so far have been highly underwhelming. It's been the worst Jeddah race that I think we have seen so far, a race that should create some intrigue, and if it wasn't for Ollie Behrman being a superstar this weekend, then the race would have been, I think, very dull. Bahrain was also not great. I'm not the biggest fan of the Bahrain circuit anyway, bit of a hot take to be fair, but I also think that what doesn't help is that there is a week of testing, effectively, before they go to Bahrain. So they know everything, right? They've done all the testing in that entire few-day period. They turn up to the track. They know everything. They know the temperatures. They know the conditions. They know how their car operates. They have the perfect setup. Like, it is aligning for boring racing because the best teams will likely qualify in those respective positions, and nothing is much going to change during the race. But we're 2 races down, and we are 2 very dull races down. And many people, understandably, are raising the point, why are these races so dull compared to what they used to be, even, let's say, a decade and a half ago? 2008, 2012, classic seasons like this. It was a very different sport to watch than it is today. There's a few reasons why this is the case. James Allison believes the primary reasons are not reasons that they are addressing. We know full well, going into 2022, it was initially, of course, meant to be 2021, but the pandemic, they pushed it back by a year to change the regulations such that the cars were easier to follow for the cars behind. This is the concept of dirty air. Here's like a current, well, let's say 2021 or 2020 Formula 1 model car. This was meant to be what it looked like in 2022, where the airflow goes upwards, more downforce generated by the floors, less downforce generated by the wings and the other implements, therefore more cleaner air to follow for the car behind. And the data was done. There was a 70% or so reduction in the dirty air between 2021 and 2022, as it turned out to be. But the reduction that we have seen has reduced dramatically since then. Every year since 2022, the cars have got faster in various ways. Therefore, the dirty air has become more of a problem, and it's honestly not too far away now, I would say, the dirty air issue compared to what we had in the up to 2021 cycle of regulations. And that was the primary problem they were trying to solve, and is a problem that I'm not sure is necessarily so solvable, right? And this is what James Allison goes on to say. This is, by the way, the concept of outwash in the pre-2022 regulations, when what the drivers, what the teams will try and do for the drivers, is to bring the air to the outside of the car. This is the tyre wake, and just generate as much downforce as possible and allow the car to slip through the air as smoothly as possible. But that means they are affected by dirty air from the car in front, and they create more dirty air for the cars behind. This is, of course, a problem. It generates a lovely, juicy slipstream in a straight line. We saw that 2021, previous seasons. The slipstream effect was massive, but in the corners, it was big. Yeah, it affected the cars big time. The regulations succeeded in 2022 at the first few races of that season, where the racing was great. It was good, close racing, in creating less dirty air and therefore allowing drivers to follow other drivers more closely and for longer. That worked for some time, but it was an inevitability as the teams further developed their car. They're finding new ways to add downforce. The dirty air effect last year in Jeddah was bad. The drivers turned up to Jeddah last year and immediately said, wow, I can barely follow through Sector 1 like I could last year. And last year's cars were what? 5-6 tenths quicker than the year before's. This year it's the same story again. These cars now are probably 1.5 seconds easily faster than they were back in 2022. Lots of that is extra downforce the teams have added on. That means more dirty air. James Allison says, this is not a problem that you can realistically solve. The way to go about it is to change other parts of the car that limit the effects and make the racing better in other ways. So this has been a big discussion lately, and look, James Allison wants to make it quite clear, of course, technical director for Mercedes. He's not just saying this because Red Bull have crushed it. Would he be saying this if Mercedes had also won for the last 3 years and they were in Red Bull's position? You can argue that maybe he wouldn't because he might not want changes. But his feeling is that every team on the grid shares his opinion to some degree. Allison says that, look, they should just do a better job. I don't necessarily think they failed in terms of a team dominating, because our job is to try and make sure we can do a good job of it or make a good fight of it. But he does feel that the way these regs have been designed doesn't serve the teams well. There are things in these regulations that don't serve any of us well. I don't think it's sensible to have cars that hug the ground in the way that these cars hug it. So that's one point. There's talk about the ground effect era in general causing problems. The drivers also don't like it. Like, even Max Verstappen, he's not going to be ranting and raving about the enjoyability of his car. Maybe this doesn't matter, but none of the drivers really enjoy driving these cars. Really stiff suspension, really close to the floor, constantly bouncing off the floor to some degree, and maybe it doesn't matter what the drivers think, but in terms of the way the cars could be designed, let's say with an active suspension or something like that, it could be rather different. And I think the idea that you get good racing by controlling the wakes while ignoring the tyres, the whole idea of controlling wakes being something of a tilting at windmills type of challenge. Now, tilting at windmills is kind of like an old English idiom. It effectively means like fighting imaginary enemies, if you know what I mean. So what he's trying to say is that the regulators are seeing ghosts when they are trying to control the wake of the car. They should instead be focusing elsewhere. And I have thought for a long time now, the tyres are the most critical thing that needs to be addressed in this sport at the moment. And that is what James Allison says. Ignoring the tyres, the way these cars operate with their tyres, is the most important thing, and controlling the wakes is irrelevant if you don't deal with the issues we have with the tyres. I think Red Bull are doing a good job, the rest of us have a duty to do a better job. That's not a fault of the regulator, but he does think that other things are a problem. He also talks about the floor and the diffuser and the ride height they have to operate on, because pre-2022, of course, there was some cars like the Red Bull with a high rake design, where the car, you can actually kind of see it in this image here, would there was a rake between the front of the floor, the back of the floor. Red Bull would have a very high angle, Mercedes would have a lower angle. Now it's not possible to really do either of those. There is no variability. You have to have your car right on the floor, and he doesn't go into so much detail as to why that's an issue. Maybe there's a thought that with the way that's designed, naturally it affects the rear tyres in a certain way, makes them overheat. I don't really know. But he does say that he's not happy with the rear ride height being good for the cars, not something they should carry into 2026 in his opinion. And he goes on to say that amongst the teams, this would be the pragmatically accepted response. So I'll see if, I guess over time, any other engineers from other teams say this. I don't imagine Red Bull will be, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if there is a general feeling among the engineers that the way these regulations are, in many ways, should not be copied. And as he says, I think the FIA is still very much of a mind to place wake management, as in controlling dirty air, at the top of the tree of everything, sacrificing all this other stuff. I think it would be helpful if there was a more balanced approach there. Just look at this image, by the way. This image is comical, as far as I'm concerned. It almost looks Photoshopped, doesn't it? This is the RB1, Red Bull's original car, driven by David Coulthard at Silverstone when they were about to launch the RB20, and this is their new RB20 on the right-hand side. You guys can tell by the high shoulders. Look how much bigger this car is on the right-hand side than the agile, small little things we used to get back in the day. Not saying these cars on the left didn't generate lots of downforce. They did. They did create some dirty air, but not to the extent of the massive cars we have today and the very heavy cars we have today. I would love to just change the regulations overnight to make the cars 500 kilograms again, and they were much smaller. That would help everything at all. And as Karun says, of course, of Sky Sports, strong and fascinating views from one of the most respected aerodynamic brains of the last 20 years. He's not just a Mercedes man, Allison. Of course, he's been at Ferrari in the past as well. Just wanted to address this real quick as well, because I see this as a common opinion, really, on it's all about TD39, and people always say this, that ever since TD39 was introduced in the midway of 2022 to outlaw the flexi floors that were supposedly being used at the time and also kind of change the ride height situation, that maybe in the immediate term had some small impact on the quality of racing in the dirty air. But I'm convinced that over the last couple of years, the TD39 is effectively a negligible factor, and just the general trends towards more and more downforce, the fact that the FIA haven't really done that much to do anything about that, has led to this situation naturally. It was an inevitability that we would get to this point with the way the regs were designed, despite the fact that in the first few races of 2022, it looked to be damn good before the team started to put the performance on the cars. And we've got to talk about the tyres. Just before we discuss this graph, this is what Mark Hughes, very respected journalist of the race, has to say. Years ago, before the current regs, I was asked by some of the F1 higher-ups what would I change to make F1 better, but not the tyres or the power units. I replied, the tyres and the power units. It is so obvious. This really, I think, gets to the crux of the matter. The power units are one thing that I wish they would change for 2026. It's probably going to be the cycle after that. I think it's Rally that have confirmed they are abandoning hybrid power units for their upcoming season. They've decided they're too heavy, they don't make sense, we're going to get rid of them, go back to combustion. I feel like we will get to that point in Formula 1, but the hybrid units, they're so big, they're so heavy, they're problematic in various ways, and, well, Formula 1 isn't going to change that because they want to do what the manufacturers want to create, and that is how it will remain. But the tyres, this is something that you can actually control. And let's have a look at this graph. This is Behrman versus Leclerc after the safety car, all on the same set of tyres. Like, Charles Leclerc set the fastest lap of the race at the end of the Grand Prix on 40-odd lap-old hard tyres. Those tyres did not degrade. Around Jeddah, the tyres don't degrade much, but the tyres just don't, and they're not fit for purpose. I think if anyone watches the Grand Prix, they will know you start the race, you push hard for the first 2 laps, then you settle back into management mode, because it's faster to manage the tyres for an entire stint than it is to push hard and take a pit stop, because the tyres don't fall off the cliff, arguably, in the way that they should. Yes, they are designed to degrade, but I don't know, Pirelli just don't do a good enough job of this. I don't think there's anybody that would tell you that they do. And maybe other teams wouldn't do a better job, or let's say Bridgestone or whatever, they wouldn't do a better job in creating something to the specifications that F1 wants. But there's got to be something said about the tyres, because it's such a fundamental point in Formula 1 that I think has just ruined the racing. Like, Qatar last year was lots of fun because there was a mandated 3-stop. Everyone was pushing flat out the entire race. And it helped certain teams, it hurt other teams because tyre deg became not a factor. And everyone was just slamming it balls to the wall for the entire race, which was tough because it was so hot. Logan Sargent was really struggling. Of course, he ended up retiring, and Stroll was saying he was passing out. But, you know, let's say it wasn't in Qatar and it was somewhere cooler. That is the type of racing that we used to get. Drivers pushing flat out all of the time because the tyres could handle it. Today, that's not the case, and the drivers just settle back into management mode a couple of laps in, and basically nothing happens, and there's no good racing. Also because if you get too close to the car in front, what happens is your tyres heat up. And this is the other point, that dirty air, yes, that's a problem. But the dirty air reduces the downforce the car behind can generate. But the car can still maintain some grip if the driver pushes the tyres harder. You can try and follow closer, even with less downforce, if you just really work on the tyres and really lean on the tyres. But the problem is if you do that in the dirty air, the tyres overheat. Then they lose grip. You lose, grip downforce on the car. Therefore, you can't follow closely anymore. So the tyres, I think, are the fundamental issue in this sport. And it's a problem that I would love to see addressed going forward. I think if there's one thing that the regulation should think about in terms of what we have today for the tyres, the way they have tried to design the tyres to degrade in a certain way, and we even see the drivers saying last year that on certain tracks, the hard is just as fast as the medium, but the hard is more durable and it goes forever. That's one of the other things that creates boring races, one-stop races, safety car happens. Like, these drivers could have easily done 50 laps on a set of hard tyres, which they shouldn't necessarily be the case. Obviously, they have to do 2 compounds. There's an argument that they should have to drive 3 compounds. I would definitely, if I had to change one rule in Formula 1 overnight, I would make a mandated situation that you have to use all 3 compounds during the Grand Prix. That would mandate a 2-stop. I think the race gets much more interesting. The races get much more interesting as a result. That doesn't necessarily solve the problems. The cars are too big. They're not agile enough. They're too heavy, most certainly. And the tyres don't seem particularly fit for purpose in the way that they're currently existing. But I do think that all of these factors are contributing to a situation where the racing has not been good so far this year. And I don't think it's going to get any better going forward, right? And that's not even really considering how Red Bull have got into such a dominant position. Questions around the cost cap and other features as to whether they really, actually help the sports. But there's just so many problems in Formula 1, off the track for sure, but also on the track. Like, the racing now and the interest level now to actually watch the Grand Prix compared to how it was 15 years ago and certainly back in the day is just nowhere near. Obviously, reliability is another factor in play. I think if there was one thing they should look at, it should be the tyres, right? I think that most people agree. And just the way that the car design affects the tyres. I think that's the key point that Allison's getting across. That like, you can, sure, design the cars to think about the wake that the car generates, but how about you design the cars to think about how that is going to affect the tyres and exactly how the tyres need to be designed to work well with those car designs. That maybe is the philosophy that Formula 1 and the FIA, the governing body, need to once again adopt. Otherwise, things might take a rather long time to change. But very much intrigued your thoughts in the comment section below. Just wanted to share this. I thought it was interesting here from Tomo. He puts this out the other day. Do you consider Esteban Ocon to be a bad teammate? Now, I will admit I did vote yes in this. As you guys can see, I think from the tick right here, 67% of people saying, yeah, slam Doc Ocon a bad teammate, which is, to be honest, for me, not particularly unexpected. I think it is a general feeling in the sport over the last several years that Ocon is not, honestly, I think Ocon races his teammates harder than he races the rest of the grid. Ocon takes the adage of the only man you've got to beat is your teammate to an absolute extreme. And I think we certainly saw that with the bad relationship that he had with, of course, Fernando Alonso over the last couple of years. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.